story. I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania speaking, and I was talking about this, and I was telling them about the effort to cloister, and I had no idea. They all knew. They're all sitting there looking at me like I'm an idiot because they knew it was right down the road. And I'm standing there talking about it like they'd never heard of it before. But it was originally a Rosicrucian settlement, and it's there today. Okay? A Rosicrucian settlement. So these are two of Hall's books that I wanted to draw your attention to. One, the one that has kind of a white background, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. This is Hall's great magnum opus. This is why many people believe he is the great occult wisdom teacher of the 20th century. Because he basically dedicated his whole life to going all over the world and gathering all of the esoteric occult wisdom teachings and philosophies from all the traditions. And he compiled them in this book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And if you go get a copy, it's like this huge book. But he teaches in there everything from Masonry to Rosicrucianism to Kabbalah to literally telling you how you can draw a pentagram on the floor and conjure up a demon and make a pact with Lucifer. Okay? He's actually got that in his book. He gives you a couple of different kind of pacts that you can make with the devil once you summon him. So that's The Secret Teachings of All Ages. His other book, The Secret Destiny of America, is the one where he really goes into a lot of detail about America's founding from the perspective of these esoteric occult societies. And I just want to reiterate, because some people get the wrong idea or the wrong impression when I talk about these things, but I want to reiterate what Dr. Stan said earlier. I definitely acknowledge, and so does David Bay, who worked with me on this, that Christians certainly came to America early on and have played a very important role in the founding and the development of America. But the conflict that we see in America today, from what I've studied, is not a conflict that began in the 1960s, as many people think. It's a conflict that has been here right from the beginning. In fact, if you read the writings of William Bradford, who came over on board the Mayflower and was the chief governor of the Plymouth colony for like 30 some odd years. He wrote a history of the Plymouth plantation. If you read his history, he talks about very early on a neighboring colony that erected a maypole. Okay? And they were getting drunk and bringing in the Indian women, and they were dancing about it in these pagan ceremonies. And he talks about how it looked as though they were resurrecting the bizarre orgies of the Bacchanalia. And so he had an awareness. It's very clear. And that's the Bacchanalia, this worship of Bacchus, the ancient god, Bacchus. And he talks about how fornication and adultery and homosexuality even were being practiced by people there right in early America, back in the 1600s. And Bradford is writing about this stuff. So part of the point that we try to make is not to deny the Christian heritage of America, but to acknowledge that this conflict has been around right from the beginning. And that while, yes, there were Christians who came here and they wanted to build their churches, and they wanted to worship the Lord and preach the gospel. And I'm certainly very thankful that they did. But they were not alone. There were other people who came here and they had a completely different idea about what America was supposed to be. And that's really what Manly Hall is talking about in his book, The Secret Destiny of America. And if you watch, I actually got one of Hall's lectures. This is a guy he wrote some 200 books in his life. And he gave 8,000 lectures before he died. 8,000 lectures. And the president of the society told me that they still have, when he died, they had a bunch of Freemasons that turned out for his funeral. Okay, they turned out, in full honors and everything to come to honor what they called, quote, illustrious Manly P. Hall. And that the Masons still, to this day, he told me, they still go by PRS, the Philosophic Research Society, and talk about what a great, wonderful influence Manly Hall was. Hall was a sculptor, just to give you a little bit more insight. He only did 3 sculptures in his lifetime. One of them was of Mahatma Gandhi. The other one was of Madame H.P. Blavatsky. And the third one was of Albert Pike. Those 3. And then he said he was done. That's what the president told me anyway. So this is a quote from Hall in Secret Destiny. He says, quote, "The English program was under the direction of Sir Francis Bacon." He's talking about the Baconian societies and the influence of Bacon during the Elizabethan era. He says, "The English program was under the direction of Sir Francis Bacon, and it was his genius that gave purpose to the enterprise. Bacon quickly realized that here in the New World was the proper environment for the accomplishment of his great dream, the establishment of the philosophic empire." And what Hall maintained, and what he writes about, is that Bacon sent these secret societies to the New World. And in chapter 13 of this book, the chapter heading is literally "Bacon's Secret Society is set up in America." And now what you've got, I want to draw your attention to this picture that Hall publishes in this book. In the center you've got Benjamin Franklin. Most people probably recognize him. You have Benjamin Franklin overlooking the eastern seaboard of the United States. Now behind him is the shadow of Sir Francis Bacon, as though Bacon is influencing the decisions that Benjamin Franklin made. Now we talk in Secret Mysteries about all that Ben Franklin did. Benjamin Franklin was a very high-ranking Freemason. He was most likely a Rosicrucian as well. And I'll talk more about Rosicrucianism here in a minute. He was most likely a Rosicrucian as well. He was the master of the lodge in Pennsylvania, here in America. He became the Grand Master of the lodge in Paris, France. He initiated Voltaire in France. Other members of that lodge were John Paul Jones and the Marquis de Lafayette, who fought with George Washington. Lafayette, when he came to America, brought with him a guy named Pierre Charles L'Enfant. L'Enfant was the architect who designed the city layout for Washington, D.C. Okay, with all that in mind. So Benjamin Franklin is Grand Master of the Lodge in Pennsylvania, Grand Master of the Lodge in Paris, and he's a member of a secret group in England known as the Hellfire Club. And he was very good friends with a guy named Sir Francis Dashwood. And Dashwood was the founder of the Hellfire Club there in England. It was a very occult society that dedicated a lot of time to mocking Christianity and having all of these anti-Christian ceremonies and things like that. And they actually had a phrase written above the entrance, the entryway to the Hellfire Club, which went down into this underground area. And the phrase was, "Do what you will shall be the whole of the law." And what they were doing, this is centuries before the Satanist Aleister Crowley, which many of you will know if you've listened to Dr. Stan or if you've seen the video, "They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll." You know how nefarious Aleister Crowley was. Well, long before Crowley, there was the Hellfire Club. And they based the phrase on this radical, heretical French priest named Francois Rabelais, who wrote this series of books called Gargantua and Pantagruel. And there they have this society that's built up, and it's called the Abbey Thelema. Okay? The Abbey Thelema. And in the Abbey Thelema, which is a mockery of the whole idea of a Catholic Church and so on, in the Abbey Thelema they just have one law: do what you will. And so that's what the Hellfire Club wrote above their hideout. And the Abbey Thelema, for those who have studied Crowley, well, actually Aleister Crowley had a retreat where he performed occult rituals, and he called it the Abbey Thelema. So Benjamin Franklin is a member then of secret societies in America, in England, and in France. These were the 3 countries that were involved in the Revolutionary War. Okay? And many people find this very, very interesting. And I could talk more about that, but I'm going to move on. So Franklin now in this picture, you've got Bacon as a shadow behind him, and then Franklin overlooking the eastern seaboard. Now you'll notice that there on the eastern seaboard you've got Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. And just south of Baltimore in time would be Washington, D.C. One of the researchers that we interview, a guy named Jim Allison, has a website up, and he talks about these global